Ilara Voss had seen many things in her 15 years with the Terran Defense Force, but she had never seen anyone like Specialist Cade Merrick. The soldier stayed silent throughout the entire battle briefing. That should have been our first warning. The tactical display cast an eerie blue glow across the faces of the 23 officers and specialists gathered in the briefing room of the TDS Harbinger. Three-dimensional projections of the Cygnus 9 system rotated slowly above the central table, highlighting the Ascendancy fleet's positions in pulsing red. Their ships had appeared without warning 6 days ago, dropping out of slip space with weapons hot, decimating the colony's orbital defenses before anyone could mount a meaningful response. Intelligence suggests the Ascendancy ground forces are concentrated here, here, and here, Fleet Admiral Riven announced, touching points on the holographic terrain map of the colony's main settlement. They've established anti-aircraft batteries covering these approach vectors. Our primary objective is to disable those batteries so our support craft can evacuate the remaining colonists. Questions flew around the room. Contingency plans were debated. Risk assessments were calculated aloud. Specialist histories of Ascendancy tactics were shared. Throughout it all, Specialist Merrick sat motionless, his weathered face betraying no emotion. Unlike the rest of the tactical response team in their pressed uniforms, Merrick wore basic combat fatigues with no insignia except for a small, unfamiliar patch on his shoulder, a black circle with a silver eclipse. "Specialist Merrick," Admiral Riven finally addressed him directly. "You've been awfully quiet. Intel says you've encountered the Ascendancy before. Any insights?" All eyes turned to the stranger who had been transferred aboard just hours before. The mission briefing, accompanied by encrypted orders from Fleet Command that gave him unprecedented operational authority. Merrick raised his gaze slowly, his steel-gray eyes scanning the room before settling on the holographic display. "Your intelligence is wrong," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. "The Ascendancy isn't here for the colony. They're hunting something beneath it." Admiral Riven frowned. "That contradicts everything we've—" "The Ascendancy doesn't deploy void harvesters for colonial suppression," Merrick interrupted, standing and walking to the display. He gestured to seemingly innocuous formations that intelligence had labeled as standard troop carriers. "These aren't transports. They're excavation units." "And how exactly would you know that?" Lieutenant Orson challenged from across the table. Merrick didn't answer immediately. He manipulated the hologram, zooming in on a particular section of the colony's central district. "Because I put what they're looking for there. 11 years. Ego?" The room fell silent. "The mission parameters have changed," he continued, his tone leaving no room for debate. "We're not going planetside to disable anti-aircraft batteries. We're going to retrieve the Nexus key before they do." He looked around the room, his expression grave. "Because if the Ascendancy gets control of a precursor artifact with dimensional manipulation capabilities, this colony won't be the only thing they destroy." Commander Voss watched the specialists exchange uneasy glances. Merrick had spoken fewer than 100 words, but he'd completely derailed the carefully planned mission. "Fleet Command's orders were explicit," Admiral Riven said after a long moment. "Specialist Merrick has operational authority on this mission. If he says we're after this Nexus key, then that's our primary objective." As the briefing adjourned and the team began filing out to prepare for deployment, Commander Voss lingered behind, studying Merrick as he stood alone at the tactical display, his focus intense. She approached him carefully. "Specialist, what exactly are we walking into down there?" Merrick's eyes never left the display. "Something I hoped would stay buried." The dropship shuddered violently as it punched through Cygnus 9's turbulent upper atmosphere. Commander Voss checked her tactical harness for the third time, a habit born from surviving 2 crash landings early in her career. Around her, the insertion team sat in tense silence, each specialist mentally preparing for the chaos that awaited them below. Specialist Merrick sat directly across from her, eyes closed, completely still despite the violent turbulence threatening to tear their craft apart. The calm was unnerving. Not the practiced steadiness of a veteran soldier, but something deeper, as though the man had already accepted every possible outcome of their mission. 90 seconds to touchdown, the pilot's voice crackled through the calm. Heavy ascendancy activity at the LZ. This is gonna be hot. Lieutenant Orson, the team's weapons specialist, spat on the deck. So we're risking 23 lives for some artifact this guy buried? Anyone else see the problem here? Orders are orders, Lieutenant, Commander Voss replied, though privately she shared his concerns. Merrick opened his eyes. Your lives were already at risk the moment the ascendancy arrived. The difference now is that you have a chance to prevent something worse. What exactly is this Nexus key? Asked Pax, the team's xenotech expert. Her augmented eyes whirred softly as she adjusted their focus. A dimensional anchor point, Merrick answered. One of 7 created by the precursors before their civilization collapsed. It can stabilize or destabilize the barriers between realities. And you just... what? Found it lying around? Lieutenant Orson's skepticism was palpable. No, Merrick said, checking his unfamiliar sidearm, a weapon none of them had seen before. I took it from the Ascendancy during a covert operation. Hiding it on a backwater colony was supposed to keep it safe. The dropship lurched violently as anti-aircraft fire clipped its port stabilizer. Warning lights bathed the cabin in crimson. 30 seconds, the pilot shouted. Hang on to something! Commander Voss gripped her harness as the craft spun into evasive maneuvers. Through the small viewport, she caught glimpses of the colony, once a thriving outpost of 50,000 souls, now a burning graveyard of shattered buildings and cratered streets. Ascendancy ground forces swarmed through the ruins like insects, their segmented exoskeletons gleaming under the planet's twin suns. Remember, Merrick raised his voice over the shriek of stressed metal, standard weapons have limited effect. On Ascendancy bioarmor, target joint sections and sensory clusters. The ship slammed into the ground with bone-jarring force, skidding across rubble before coming to a halt. The ramp dropped immediately and acrid smoke poured into the cabin. Move! 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 Commander Voss shouted, leading the charge out into the battlefield. They emerged into hell. The designated landing zone was a ruined plaza surrounded by the skeletal remains of high-rise buildings. Ascendancy scout units were already converging on their position, their chittering battle language echoing between the ruins. Merrick was suddenly beside her, moving with unexpected speed and grace for a man his age. We need to reach the Colonial Administration building, he said, pointing to a half-collapsed structure 2 kilometers north. The key is secured in a sub-basement vault. The first wave of Ascendancy soldiers appeared, not the bipedal warriors, depicted in the intelligence briefings, but something more bestial, with multiple limbs ending in wicked serrated appendages. They moved with unnatural speed, bounding across the rubble-strewn plaza. Lieutenant Orson opened fire, his heavy pulse rifle sending blue-white energy bolts into the charging enemies. The shots that connected seemed to have minimal effect. Joints. And sensory clusters! Merrick shouted, demonstrating by dropping to one knee and firing his strange weapon. The projectile, if it could be called that, phased through the creature's armor and detonated within. The Ascendancy soldier collapsed, its exoskeleton cracking from the inside out. The team adapted quickly, adjusting their aim to target the weak points Merrick had identified. More enemies fell, but for each one that dropped, 3 more appeared. From the surrounding ruins. We can't hold this position, Commander Voss called out as she reloaded her rifle. We need to move. Merrick nodded, scanning the battlefield with those unnervingly calm eyes. There, he pointed to a partially collapsed transit tunnel. That will take us beneath the main battle lines. As they fought their way toward the tunnel entrance, Commander Voss couldn't shake the feeling that Merrick seemed to know this colony far better than someone who had merely hidden something here years ago. He navigated the ruins with too much confidence, anticipating structural weaknesses and ascendancy patrol patterns alike. Just before they reached the tunnel, a massive explosion rocked the plaza behind them. Their dropship, along with their extraction plan, disappeared in a ball of flame. The transit tunnel stretched before them like the gullet of some ancient beast, emergency lighting casting alternating patches of dim red illumination and impenetrable shadow. Water dripped from fractured pipes overhead, creating an eerie percussive rhythm that echoed down the curved passage. 3 clicks to the administration building, Commander Voss announced, consulting her TAC map. Assuming this tunnel remains intact the whole way, their 12-person squad, all that remained of the original team after the brutal landing zone engagement, moved forward in standard tactical formation. Specialist Pax had rigged her xenotech scanner to detect ascendancy bioforms, giving them precious seconds of warning if enemies approached. Lieutenant Orson limped slightly from a glancing blow that had partially melted his leg armor. "You going to tell us the real story now, Merrick? Because I'm starting to think Fleet Command doesn't know half of what's really happening here." Merrick, walking point alongside Commander Voss, remained silent for several moments. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an edge of reluctance. "The Nexus Key isn't just an artifact," he said. "It's part of a network that spans multiple realities. The precursors built it as a safeguard against something they called the Convergence, an event where dimensional barriers collapse completely." "And why would the Ascendancy want to trigger something like that?" asked Sarek, the squad's demolitions expert. "They don't want to trigger it," Merrick replied. "They want to prevent anyone else from triggering it. The Ascendancy believe they're the only ones who can safely control the keys." Commander Voss studied Merrick's profile in the dim light. "And who exactly are you in all this? Because you're not regular TDF, that much is obvious." Before Merrick could answer, Pax's scanner emitted a soft warning tone. "Movement ahead," she whispered. "But the signatures are strange, not typical ascendancy patterns." The team took defensive positions, weapons trained on the darkness ahead. The sounds came first, a wet, sliding noise punctuated by metallic clicks. Then shapes emerged from the shadows, humanoid figures encased in partial ascendancy bio-armor. Their exposed flesh melded grotesquely with the alien technology. Their movements were jerky, uncoordinated, as though the human and alien components were fighting for control. "Conscripts," Merrick said grimly. "Colonists repurposed for combat." Horror rippled through the squad. The intelligence briefings had mentioned rumors of the Ascendancy experimenting with human subjects, but seeing the reality was far worse than any description. The conscripts charged, moving with unnatural speed despite their awkward gait. Unlike the pure Ascendancy troops they'd faced earlier, these hybrid creatures showed no tactical awareness, just raw, desperate aggression. "Non-lethal if possible," Commander Voss ordered, her voice tight. These were colonists. The squad switched to stun settings, but it quickly became apparent that conventional non-lethal methods had little effect on the hybrid physiology. The first wave broke against their defensive line, forcing them into brutal close-quarters combat. Merrick moved with lethal efficiency, his strange weapon configured to emit targeted electromagnetic pulses that disrupted the neural interfaces between human and alien components. The conscripts he engaged collapsed, the alien parts of them twitching, then going dormant. "Use EM pulses!" he called out. "Target the integration nodes at the base of the skull!" The team adapted quickly, modifying their weapons on the fly. Within minutes, the ambush had been neutralized, leaving 24 unconscious hybrids sprawled across the tunnel floor. "They can be saved," Merrick said, kneeling beside one of the fallen conscripts. "If the integration process hasn't progressed too far, the bio-armor can be removed. But we don't have time for that now." "You've seen this before," Commander Voss observed. It wasn't a question. Merrick stood. Yes, on 17 worlds across 3 systems. He paused, then seemed to make a decision. I'm part of a group called Eclipse. We've been fighting the Ascendancy in secret for nearly 2 decades, trying to keep the Nexus keys out of their hands. Eclipse, Lieutenant Orson repeated. Never heard of it. That's the point, Merrick said. We operate outside normal military channels because the Ascendancy has infiltrated most major governments, including potentially parts of Fleet Command. The implications were staggering. Commander Voss felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp tunnel air. You're saying we might have been deliberately sent into a trap? I'm saying we can't be certain who to trust, Merrick replied. Which is why I insisted on operational authority. Eclipse discovered the Ascendancy was closing in on this location 3 days ago. I barely had time to get assigned to your mission. A distant rumble shook dust from the tunnel ceiling. The ground trembled beneath their feet. They've started deep excavation, Merrick said grimly. We're running out of time. The Colonial Administration building rose from the center of the devastated settlement like a broken monument to humanity's fragile foothold in the stars. Once an impressive example of frontier architecture, combining function with aesthetic nods to Earth's ancient ziggurat temples, it now stood partially collapsed, its eastern face entirely exposed, where an Ascendancy energy weapon had sheared it away. Commander Voss and her team emerged from the transit tunnel 2 blocks away, taking cover in the burnt-out shell of what had once been a hydroponic garden. Through her tactical visor's enhanced optics, she could see Ascendancy forces swarming around the building's base, setting up heavy excavation equipment. Massive drills bore into the ground at precise intervals, creating a perfect geometric pattern. They've identified the vault's location, Merrick observed, his expression grim. But they don't have the access codes. They're going to brute force their way in. Lieutenant Orson spat quietly. So how do we get past that perimeter? There must be 50 troops down there, plus those walker units. Merrick pulled a small device from his pack, a metallic sphere no larger than a fist, etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Eclipse countermeasure tech, he explained. It generates a localized field that confuses Ascendancy sensory systems. We'll still need to move carefully, but it should prevent them from detecting us directly. Commander Voss nodded. We'll split into 2 teams. Merrick, myself, Pax, and Sarek will retrieve the key. Orson, you take the rest and set up a defensive perimeter at this junction. She indicated a position on her TAC map. When we have the package, we'll need quick extraction through that corridor. And how exactly are we getting off this rock afterward? Orson asked. Our ride's in pieces back at the LZ. One problem at a time, Lieutenant, Voss replied, though the same question had been gnawing at her since their dropship was destroyed. Merrick activated the countermeasure device, which emitted a soft, pulsing hum. Stay within 5 meters of this at all times, he instructed, and move exactly as I do. Ascendancy troops rely heavily on motion pattern recognition. Anything that moves like a human will trigger their alert systems, field or no field. What he followed was the strangest approach to an objective that Commander Voss had experienced in 15 years of special operations. Merrick led them in a bizarre, almost dance-like movement pattern. 3 steps forward, a pause, 2 steps at an angle, another pause, then a fluid motion that somehow blended crouching with forward momentum. It felt ridiculous, but as they passed within meters of Ascendancy sentries who showed no reaction to their presence, Voss couldn't argue with the results. They reached the administration building's western entrance undetected. Inside, the once grand atrium lay in ruins, its high ceiling partially collapsed. Bodies of colonists and security personnel were scattered among the debris, some showing signs of energy weapon impacts, others bearing the more horrific marks of close-quarter Ascendancy weapons. The vault access is through the director's office, Merrick whispered, leading them up a damaged staircase. 2 levels down from here. Pax suddenly raised her hand in warning, her augmented eyes glowing faintly as she scanned ahead. Unusual energy signature, she murmured. Moving toward us, not matching known ascendancy patterns. They took defensive positions behind overturned furniture and support columns. Seconds later, a figure emerged from a connecting corridor. Human in form, but moving with unnatural precision. Unlike the crude conscript hybrids they'd encountered earlier, this being appeared to be a perfect fusion of human and ascendancy technology. Its skin had a metallic sheen, and faint lines of bioluminescence traced patterns across its face and exposed arms. "Emissary?" Merrick breathed, barely audible. The being stopped, its head tilting slightly as though sensing something amiss. Then, it spoke, its voice carrying both human inflection and an underlying harmonic that raised the hairs on the back of Voss's neck. "I know you're here, Merrick." The voice echoed in the ruined atrium. "Your countermeasures can't hide you from me. We're too connected for that." Merrick's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. He signaled for the team to hold position, then stepped out from cover, keeping the countermeasure device activated behind him. "Reese," he said evenly. "I wondered if they'd send you." The emissary smiled, an expression that never reached its unnaturally bright eyes. "They didn't send me. I volunteered. Old time's sake." Commander Voss felt a chill. The familiarity between these two suggested a history far deeper than Merrick had revealed. "The key doesn't belong to the ascendancy," Merrick said. "You know what they'll do with it." "I know they'll use it appropriately," Reese replied. "Humanity had its chance, Cade. Eclipse had its chance. You've failed. The convergence is coming regardless of what we do. The only question is who will control the aftermath." Merrick's hand drifted toward his weapon. "I can't let you have it. You don't have a choice." The emissary's form suddenly blurred with movement, covering the distance between them faster than human reflexes could track. What followed was a combat unlike anything Commander Voss had witnessed. Merrick moved with impossible speed, matching the emissary blow for blow. Their fight carried them across the atrium in a deadly dance, neither fully human in their capabilities. Furniture shattered under the force of their impacts. Support columns cracked when bodies were thrown against them. Voss signaled her team to circle around toward the director's office while the emissary was distracted. As they moved, she caught glimpses of the battle. Merrick using techniques no TDF training program taught, the emissary's limbs occasionally shifting form to gain tactical advantages. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Merrick wasn't fully human either. The vault door stood before them, 3 meters of reinforced composite materials designed to withstand orbital bombardment. Unlike the destruction that had ravaged the rest of the administration building, this subterranean chamber remained pristine, its security system still operational despite the chaos above. Commander Voss watched as Merrick worked the complex locking mechanism, his movements betraying none of the injuries he had sustained in his brutal confrontation with the emissary. They had left Reese trapped beneath a collapsed section of flooring several levels up, temporarily contained, but unlikely to remain so for long. "You're going to explain what's really happening here," Voss said quietly, keeping her weapon casually aimed in Merrick's general direction. "Starting with what you are." Merrick didn't look up from the lock. "Human, mostly." "Not good enough," she replied. "I saw you fight. No human moves like that." Pax and Sarek exchanged uneasy glances, their own weapons not quite pointed at Merrick, but positioned where they could be brought to bear quickly if needed. Merrick sighed, his hands pausing on the lock's interface. Eclipse wasn't formed to fight the ascendancy. It was formed to understand them, to learn from them. He turned to face Voss, pulling down the collar of his combat suit to reveal a network of faint, luminescent lines beneath his skin, similar to those they had seen on the emissary, but less pronounced. Some of us took that mission more literally than others. "You integrated their tech," Pax whispered, her xenotech expertise allowing her to understand the implications immediately. "Voluntarily." "Controlled integration," Merrick nodded. "Limited to neural enhancement, sensory augmentation, and physical reinforcement. No cognitive rewiring. No loyalty protocols." His expression darkened. "Not like what they did to Reese." "Who was he?" Commander Voss asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "My partner. We infiltrated an ascendancy research vessel together, looking for information on the Nexus keys. He was captured." Merrick's voice remained steady, but his eyes reflected old pain. "By the time I found him, they had already begun the conversion process. I couldn't stop it." The vault mechanism emitted a series of tones, and the massive door began to slide open with a hydraulic hiss. "He's coming," Sarek warned, checking the motion tracker. "And he's bringing friends, multiple ascendancy signatures converging on our position." "You should have told us everything from the beginning," Commander Voss said, lowering her weapon. The anger in her voice had been replaced by grim determination. "We deserve to know what we're really fighting for." "Would you have believed me?" Merrick asked as he led them into the vault, a circular chamber dominated by a central pedestal. "Would Fleet Command have authorized the mission if they knew the truth about the Nexus keys? About the convergence?" The pedestal held a single object, a crystalline structure about the size of a human hand, geometric in design, but with an organic quality to its construction. It pulsed with an inner light that seemed to shift between colors that had no name in human language. "The Nexus. Key," Merrick said, approaching it reverently. "One of 7 anchors holding reality stable." "And the convergence?" Voss asked, keeping one eye on the vault entrance. "What exactly are we preventing?" Merrick carefully lifted the key from its resting place. The moment his hands made contact, the luminescent lines beneath his skin brightened in response. "The precursors discovered something about the nature of reality," he explained, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. "That all possible universes exist simultaneously, separated by barriers that were never meant to be permanent. The convergence is the natural collapse of these barriers, realities bleeding into one another until all possibility exists at once. That sounds." Pax struggled to find the right word. "Apocalyptic." "It would be the end of existence as we understand it," Merrick confirmed. "The Nexus keys were created to reinforce the barriers, to delay the inevitable, but they can also be used to control how and when the barriers fail. The Ascendancy believes they're the only species evolved enough to navigate the convergence, to shape what comes after." A distant explosion shook dust from the vault ceiling. The sounds of combat reached them, Lieutenant Orson's team engaging. The approaching Ascendancy forces. "And Eclipse?" Commander Voss asked. "What do you believe?" Merrick secured the key in a specialized container. "That no single species should control the fate of all realities. That whatever comes after the convergence should emerge naturally, not be engineered by beings who see themselves as gods." The vault's massive door suddenly buckled inward, metal screaming as it was torn by forces it was never designed to withstand. Through the widening gap, they could see the emissary, Reese, his form now less human than before, limbs elongated and partially transformed into weapons. "Fall back," Commander Voss ordered, laying down suppressive fire that seemed to have little effect on the advancing emissary. Merrick stepped forward, the container holding the Nexus key secured to his back. "There's another way out," he said, moving to a section of the vault wall that appeared identical to the rest. His hand pressed against a specific point, and a hidden door slid open, revealing a narrow passage beyond. "How did you know about that?" Voss demanded as they retreated into the secret corridor. "Because I helped design this vault," Merrick replied, sealing the hidden door behind them. 11 years ago, when we first hid the key here, the passage led them deeper beneath the colony, into areas that appeared far older than the settlement above. The architecture changed, becoming more angular, with surfaces covered in symbols reminiscent of those on Merrick's countermeasure device. Precursor. Construction, Pax breathed, her augmented eyes taking in details the others missed. This colony was built on top of their ruins. Not by accident, Merrick confirmed. Eclipse established this colony specifically to hide the key within an existing precursor structure. Their technology helps mask the key's energy signature. The passage opened into a vast chamber that defied the expectations of something built underground. Its ceiling arched impossibly high, supported by columns that seemed to be made of solid light. At the center stood a raised platform surrounded by 7 equidistant pillars. A translation nexus, Merrick explained, moving toward the platform. The precursors use these to travel between their outposts. With the key, we can activate it, create a portal to any location with a corresponding nexus. Including a way off this planet? Commander Voss asked, hope entering her voice for the first time since their mission had gone sideways. Merrick nodded. There's a nexus at an Eclipse facility in the Arcturus system, but once we use the key this way, its energy signature will flare. Every Ascendancy ship in the sector will know exactly where we're going. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. The emissary was breaking through their hastily established barricades. Do we have a choice? Sarek asked, checking his dwindling ammunition. No, Merrick said grimly. We don't. The precursor nexus hummed with building energy as Merrick placed the key into a receptacle at the center of the platform. The 7 pillars surrounding them began to glow with the same shifting, nameless colors that pulsed within the crystalline artifact. Symbols, etched into the chamber's floor, illuminated in sequence, forming complex patterns that spiraled outward from the central platform. Orson's team? Commander Voss asked, establishing a comm link with the lieutenant. Static answered her. Orson, report! After several tense seconds, the lieutenant's voice broke through, accompanied by the sounds of heavy combat. Pinned! Down! These aren't regular troops. They're some kind of elite guard. Can't hold much longer. Fall back to our position, Voss ordered. We've found an extraction route. Negative, Commander, Orson replied, his voice strained but resolute. No clear path. We'll buy you time. Before Voss could respond, the communication cut out completely. She closed her eyes briefly, honoring the sacrifice with a moment of silence. The Nexus will be operational in 2 minutes, Merrick announced, his hands moving across controls that responded to his touch in ways that suggested an interface beyond normal human comprehension. But we have a problem. The system was designed for precursor physiology. Someone needs to remain at the controls until the transition is complete. Meaning what, exactly? Pax asked, dividing her attention between Merrick's work and the tunnel entrance they had emerged from. Meaning someone stays behind? Sarek answered grimly, understanding the implication immediately. Merrick nodded. The one who stays can follow, in a second wave, but there will be a delay of approximately 3 minutes between activations. Given how close the Ascendancy forces are, he didn't need to finish the thought. 3 minutes might as well be 3 years against what was pursuing them. I'll stay, Commander Voss declared without hesitation. Get the key to safety. That's the mission. Merrick looked at her with newfound respect, but shook his head. My neural enhancements are integrated with the control system. It has to be me. The argument was cut short by a massive explosion that shook the entire chamber. Dust and debris rained down as the tunnel entrance collapsed, not from pursuit trying to get in, but from their own people creating a last barrier. Lieutenant Orson staggered through the settling dust, supporting a badly wounded Specialist Terrene. They were the only survivors of the rear guard. Sealed it behind us, Orson reported, his face streaked with blood and soot. Took out a few of their elites in the process. The rest will have to find another way around. They already have, Merrick said, pointing to a display that had materialized above the central platform. It showed ascendancy forces converging on their position from multiple directions. They're tapping into the precursor network itself. Clever. The pillar's light intensified, and a shimmering field began to form between them, the beginnings of a portal. 1 minute to full activation, Merrick announced. Once it's stable, step through immediately. Don't hesitate. Don't look back. An inhuman shriek echoed through the chamber, followed by the sound of tearing metal. At the far side of the vast space, a section of wall was being peeled away as though it were made of paper instead of ancient alloys designed to last millennia. The emissary stepped through the breach, but the being that entered only vaguely resembled the form they had encountered earlier. Reese had undergone a further transformation, his body now a grotesque amalgamation of human and ascendancy biology, limbs multiplied and reconfigured into weapons, torso expanded to house additional systems, face retained but surrounded by sensory appendages that twitched and probed the air. Behind him came the elite guard, bipedal ascendancy soldiers larger than standard troops, their exoskeletons adorned with intricate markings that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Cade! The emissary's voice had changed as well, now a multi-tonal chorus that suggested multiple consciousness streams operating in parallel. The key belongs to those who understand its purpose. You're fighting for a species that isn't ready for what's coming. Maybe not, Merrick replied, his hands never stopping their work on the control interface. But humanity deserves the chance to prepare on its own terms, not as servants to the ascendancy. The portal between the pillars solidified, showing a glimpse of another chamber similar to theirs, but intact and staffed with figures in Eclipse uniforms. Go! Merrick shouted to the survivors. Now! Pax and Sarek rushed forward, supporting the injured Tareen between them. They vanished through the portal in a flash of light. Lieutenant Orson hesitated, looking to Commander Voss for confirmation. That's an order, Lieutenant, she said firmly, readying her weapon to cover their retreat. Orson nodded once, then stepped through the dimensional gateway. The emissary launched forward with explosive speed, covering half the chamber in a single bound. The elite guards spread out, their integrated weapons charging with lethal energy. Commander Voss opened fire, aiming for the joint sections as Merrick had taught them. One elite staggered as her shots found their mark, but the others advanced, relentlessly. Voss, go! Merrick shouted, one hand maintaining contact with the control system while the other drew his weapon. I'll be right behind you. She knew it was a lie even as he said it. The portal was beginning to fluctuate, its edges, becoming unstable as the ascendancy forces disrupted the chamber's energy field. Someone would need to remain at the controls to stabilize it for even one more person to pass through safely. Their eyes met across the platform, a lifetime of unspoken communication passing between them in an instant. Voss saw the truth in Merrick's gaze, that he had always known this mission would end with his sacrifice. That perhaps he had been seeking it, after years of fighting a secret war, after losing his partner to the enemy. The key, he said, removing the container from his back and tossing it to her. Make sure Eclipse understands. It can't just be hidden again. The convergence is accelerating. All 7 keys need to be brought together to reinforce the barriers. The emissary was nearly upon them, moving with a speed that defied physics. Go! Merrick roared, firing his weapon not at the advancing forces but at the chamber ceiling above them. Massive chunks of ancient material began to fall, temporarily blocking the Ascendancy's advance.